Bon dia, welcome to Exploring Timor-Leste, the podcast that talks about Southeast Asia's best kept travel secret. I'm your host Jonty, and I'll share first-hand insights, expert interviews and practical travel tips. Whether you're a traveller, a culture lover or just curious about places rarely covered in the mainstream, you're in the right place. Let's explore Timor-Leste. Today's episode is about Atauro Island, also called Atauro Island, depending on your English or Teton pronunciation. And this is where people are most likely to visit if they come to Timor-Leste, as it is the hub for snorkeling and diving. It is one of the easiest places to visit from Dili, and it has the most tourist infrastructure, although that is quite a low bar. So just to manage expectations, there are 3 resorts, but they're all quite basic. But that's part of the charm. It's a quiet tropical paradise with little development outside of Beloi where the ferries arrive. Atauro lies about 30 kilometres north of Dili and is home to about 12,000 people. It's reached by ferry, which as of recording in mid-2025 is 5 days a week. There are ferry services between Dili and Atauro, and there are also flights from Dili to Atauro. Interestingly, unlike the rest of Timor-Leste, the local population is predominantly Protestant, not Catholic, after Calvinist missionaries arrived in the early 20th century. I covered snorkeling and diving in episode 2 of this podcast, so I won't repeat that here, and I'm going to do a separate episode on hiking on Atauro Island. This episode is going to focus on the other attractions on the island. Starting with Beloi, this is where almost all visitors will spend the majority of their time, as it is home to the ferry wharf. It's close to the airstrip, and the majority of the accommodation on the island is in Beloi. It's also a beautiful place with a nice beach, and there is a fantastic reef just offshore, which can be reached either by walking in or better still by getting one of the local fishing boats for about a 5-minute journey out to the inner reef and going snorkeling there, or a little bit further out to go diving. There are 3 main places to stay in Beloi. There is Barry's place, which I always stay at. That's my favourite. But there's also Atauro Dive Resort and Compass Diving, which have more diving focus but also offer accommodation and food. And there's also a number of homestays within the village. The village is well worth a wander around to get a flavour for what a Timorese village is like. And if you have the energy, you can head up towards Beloi Beach Hotel, which may or may not be open. And next to that, there's a huge new Protestant church being built on the hillside. This is about 20 minutes walk away from the beach, and it offers good views of the coastline. Beloi is home to some excellent local markets. The best day to visit those is on a Saturday, as that is when they have the most stalls. So expect to see large bags of seaweed, some very colourful fish, and lots of dried fish, which the island is known for. Although Beloi is where most of the visitors spend their time, the largest settlement on the island is Vila. This is about a 15-20 minute tuk-tuk ride from Beloi along the coast. Vila isn't my favourite place on the island. It's very spread out. There's a few places of interest. There's quite a good church. If you head up the hillside, there's a Lady Mary cave, which is a statue of the Virgin Mary, which was built during the Indonesian occupation and offers great views over the town. Lampida Beach is very pleasant and can be reached at low tide by walking south along Vila's beach towards Makili. And also at low tide on the Vila beach, look out for the rusting remains of a ship. If you head further south from Vila, there's the beautiful fishing village of Makili. You can either get there by heading up and over the hills, which is past the Lady Mary cave, and there's a new giant statue of the Virgin Mary being built, and then down to Makili. Or you can go along the coast at low tide only. It's a bit rocky. You need to be comfortable with a little bit of clambering. Or you can turn it into an excellent half-day hike by doing it as a loop, depending on the tide. So either go up over the hill and back around the coast, or the other way, depending on when low tide is. Makili is known for its crafts. There's a local collective there. And there's also a statue of St. Peter, the patron saint of fishermen, close to the water. The other main settlements on the east coast heading north from Beloi, Makili and Akrema. Makili is by far the largest, but there isn't particularly anything to see from a tourist perspective there. You can walk from Makili up the coastline to Akrema. Along the way, there are hot springs marked on the map, but these are not necessarily what you might expect to see when you think of a hot spring. They're coastal, so they're in the sea. They are tidal, so you can't see them at high tide. And when they are exposed at low tide, they're hot enough to burn your skin. So they're more for something to look at rather than to sit in. But heading up to Akrema, that's one of the most beautiful spots on the island. It's the only real white sand beach. It has a Cave of the Dead, which is a bit further north from the beach, which has the remains of human bones, and it probably has the best campsite on the island. There is a reef there, but it's a long way out to swim to. Even people with paddleboards would struggle to get there. But it is a beautiful place to swim and relax, but note there are basically no facilities. There may be a small local shop, but otherwise you'll need to bring everything with you. Now, I particularly like the west coast of Atauro Island. Very few people visit the west coast. It has quite a different look and feel to the east coast. So particularly in the dry season, the east coast can get really quite dry and dusty, but the west coast is often still very green and lush. I took a boat ride once all the way around the island, and it was a very noticeable difference between the east and the west coast. The most popular spot to visit on the west coast is Adara. This is a 3-hour hike from Beloi over mainly roads, so it is quite exposed and sunny and hot, but it's worth getting down into Adara. There you can stay at Mario's place, which is a collection of idyllic beachside huts. Adara has an impressive reef to snorkel over, but certainly when I went, the currents were quite strong and it's a rocky beach. There's only really one entrance and exit. So Mario's place in Adara is definitely worth a visit, and they have superb sunsets. But my favourite on the island is Atecru. So this is about an hour south of Adara. It's one of the most beautiful places on the island. It has a long sandy beach, and the snorkeling in the reef is probably one of the best in Timor-Leste, particularly the drop-off. So similar to Adara, and actually even in Beloi, if you head further out, there's where the reef kind of drops off into the abyss. It's kind of a bit spooky, but it is an incredible experience to snorkel over. And there's a couple of historical sites in Atecru which are also worth visiting. They will need to pay a little bit of money to the local community to do so. There's a cave that's been used as a shelter for at least 18,000 years, and it has 8,000-year-old rock art. And then further around the coastline is the Singing Rock, which is an unusual hollow rock that can be played almost like a musical instrument. If you want an authentic Timorese kind of homestay experience, I'd recommend staying at Jockey's Place. He has a couple of huts, and there's also camping as possible, and the food is excellent. I stayed there, I think, 3 times during my time in Timor. You can either hike out to Atecru, which you're going to spend at least half a day walking there from Beloi, or you can get a boat ride from Beloi around to Atecru is another way of reaching it. Finally, there are some villages inland. Anatutu is probably the largest, which is about halfway between Vila and Atecru. There is a very rough road to get there. It's easier to walk, although it's still quite a decent walk. There's not a lot to see up there, but it is quite an interesting contrast from the coastal villages. And then also Arlo, you'll probably come across if you walk between Beloi and Adara. Arlo is an inland village just before you reach the west coast, and that's quite an attractive place to take a quick look around. Now, getting around Atauro Island, they are building roads, but they're quite rough, and you definitely need a four-wheel drive vehicle or have good motorbike skills. Generally, the best way of getting around is on foot if you're heading kind of inland, or if you're going around the coast, there are tuk-tuks available between Beloi and Vila. Hope this has given you a good overview of what you can do on the island, and I hope if you go and stay, you have a wonderful time. Thank you so much for listening to Exploring Timor-Leste. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at exploringtimorleste@gmail.com. Until next time, obrigado ho adeus.